Welcome to episode 59 of the Achieve Workplace Culture podcast, where we help you find actionable ways to strengthen your workplace culture. Today, we're going to talk about vulnerability and leadership, but we're going to put a few caveats around it, I think. I've heard the two of you talking recently, and you have some question marks about the word vulnerability. So, the people I'm talking to, Chris Downey, Wendy Lowen, my regular co-hosts today, so welcome here to the both of you. I want to start with some word association with the two of you. Do you mind?
Sure.
No.
Word is vulnerability.
Yeah.
What pops into your head when you hear that word? Just a couple words.
Wound. Wounded.
Open.
Let's do another one. Wounded, open. Weak is one that comes
Okay.
into my mind.
Yeah.
Any
Soft.
others?
Emotional.
Emotional,
Touchy-feely.
Exposed.
exposed. Yeah. Lots of things that we can associate with vulnerability. And yet there has been a movement
Right.
in the last 10 to 15 years that's been saying that we as leaders need to be willing to express vulnerability.
Sure.
I can imagine there's a fair number of leaders out there who are thinking about that word and associating it with some of the more negative words we just came up with here. So I wonder if we should start this podcast by doing a quick, why are we talking about vulnerability in the leadership space? Who popularized that? And then let's talk about what we think vulnerability is, should be, and what it shouldn't be.
Brene Brown
Mm-hmm.
has a fantastic TED Talk on vulnerability. She's written many books. She talks about vulnerability.
Mhm.
And I think there's been a misunderstanding of her work
Mm-hmm.
in some arenas where vulnerability has come to be seen as oversharing the emotional component of your own experience as a leader.
Mhm.
And so I think it's important to talk about, because I do believe in vulnerability in your work environment, but I think we need to be careful about how we define what that is.
For sure. Yeah, I think Brene Brown's definitely popularized it for sure, and probably taken it. I think the vulnerability in the leadership sphere has been talked about even predating Brene Brown's public work, but I think what Brene Brown's made it more popularized.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I know
She's a great speaker.
in leader, yes, and she does a wonderful job of it. But I think in leadership, vulnerability or being vulnerable is at the root of building trust, right? So from a leadership perspective, it's hard to really build trust with somebody if you're not prepared to be vulnerable. That's kind of that was where I first learned that context, where
Yeah.
that idea of to really trust somebody is at a true level. Is vulnerability based,
Okay.
whereas in many cases, I think this was Patrick Lencioni that talked about there's predictive trust. I know how Eric's going to react, right? But I trust I know how he's going to react. But that's because I can predict your behavior based on my experiences.
Right.
That's not really trust. I'm just predicting behavior.
Interesting.
Vulnerability based trust is trust on a much deeper level. Yeah.
And I mean, I think of vulnerability as the ability, the courage, the willingness to show up, to be present when the outcomes aren't certain, whether that's the reaction from your team, a process, a system you're redesigning, a project you're working on, but you have the courage, the vulnerability to step into that conversation and engage with an uncertain outcome.
Wow. Okay. So vulnerability can be about our willingness to show up when there's uncertainty. And Chris, I think what you're talking about is adjacent to that and also important, which is more about being real.
Yeah, that to me is that when we really get into this, I know we're talking about this in the leadership context, but to be vulnerable is to be real, to really be authentic. Here's what I'm dealing with now. And I think if we use Brene Brown's work, not to armor up.
Right. Yes.
So I think, and so in any relationship, a work relationship, a romantic relationship, the moment we're armored up,
Mm-hmm.
we're not being real.
Mm-hmm.
So if we really want to build true trust and safety, it's being able to be real
Mm-hmm.
and have that realness not taken advantage of. Right. So this is where it gets so touchy that I think, so to me, being vulnerable is ultimately being real
Interesting.
and unarmored.
Okay.
But the question becomes,
Is that a good idea?
Yeah, where and when, right?
Yeah. And I think that shows up in a lot of different ways and as in a leadership position.
Sure.
And it is about being real, but it isn't just about the emotional component of our experience in leadership. So I
Right.
think about innovation and being vulnerable in innovation as a leader. You're walking into a space where the outcomes are not guaranteed.
Mhm.
You don't know what the end result is going to be. As a leader, you are giving shape to whatever this is going to be. And to be vulnerable in that is to say, I'm not sure what the outcome might be. I want us to work on this together. I don't have all the answers. I want the contribution of the team. So it's not just, and I think that's where the misunderstanding of what
Sure.
vulnerability has been. It's important to be emotionally real with
Right.
our team to an extent.
Yeah.
But it also translates into a lot of different other areas.
Well, let's riff on that for a minute, because I agree with you. To me, being vulnerable is about being real fundamentally. Now, that's not just emotionally real. That's real. Let's just be authentic in the moment. What
Yeah.
are we dealing with? So I think but it needs to be appropriate for the situation. So as you mentioned, if we think about being vulnerable within the work context, that could be about admitting mistakes or I'm uncertain. That's being real. But that doesn't mean here's everything I'm dealing with. Here's all my emotional baggage. So I think that to me, the definition still applies, but where appropriate. You know what I'm getting at? Or in the appropriate circumstance.
So I'm a listener. How do I know what's actually appropriate? What level of realness or vulnerability is it? Like, I am terrified that if we do this, things aren't going to work out. The workplace is going to suffer. People are going to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
That might be real for a leader out there.
Sure.
Is that what you share? How do you know what you share?
Yeah.
You know,
I'm with you. I think let's talk about the role of leadership. I think this is where we want to use this maybe to anchor the conversation.
Yeah.
Because vulnerability shows up in all aspects of life,
Yeah.
and we can dig into that. But I think in the context of leadership, I think, Wendy, something you've talked about perhaps being overinterpreted. I think leaders have accepted I need to be vulnerable, but in some cases come in and say, I'm terrified. I have no idea where things are going.
Right.
And now you're causing fear amongst your employees, but it's like, why is this being real?
Yeah.
I think it needs to be relative to like, what's your role as a leader? And one of the things we need to be as leaders is to be calm, right? And even a bit optimistic, even in the face of adversity. So it's one thing to acknowledge concern, but we need to be careful about what are we doing with our vulnerability. As a leader, is our vulnerability helping somebody grow, or is that for us? Right? This is the key. I think what we see a lot of leaders doing is oversharing. And what they do is then all of a sudden we put our problems onto our employees, even if it's a personal problem. And it's not our employees' responsibility to actually care for our well-being.
Yeah.
It's nice when they do,
Yes,
but it's not their responsibility.
Right.
But it is ours of theirs. So I think we need to be careful that being vulnerable, and I might be terrified, but what I'm going to share with this group, is this going to help them, or is this going to hinder their ability to be successful? I think that is kind of where the boundaries need to be set. And I think you could say, I'm concerned, without coming in saying, I'm freaking out. I have no idea what's happening.
Yeah, because that's putting our insecurities that we need to work with or work through.
Right.
We need to work through that in another platform.
Yeah. And not that that's not important. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
People are different. People come from different walks of life.
Yeah.
Some of us are from a demographic like me, European descent,
Sure.
white, tall, well-educated, had all the opportunities that I could want.
Handsome.
I'm very lucky.
I'll throw that in there too.
And which?
Handsome.
We'll
throw that in there
thank
too.
you, Chris.
Yeah.
That's very nice of you. So all of these things, is it different for me to express vulnerability as a leader and maybe as a CEO in an organization than for somebody who is a junior leader from identified minority, person of color, whatever? Yeah. What's it like? Does it feel different to that person? And is it different? Should we have different expectations?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this links to what we were talking about earlier a CEO coming in and being uncertain of the future and voicing that in a very emotional way is not what we're talking about when we talk about vulnerability.
Okay.
And as a CEO, as someone in a leadership position, there is certain privilege that comes with that in a way it's easier for us to be vulnerable because the repercussions of that are not quite so weighty as someone from a different demographic, maybe a cultural background, even the power differential between male and female. All of that plays into, is it actually safe to be vulnerable
and
in
I
that
probably
position?
feel safer
Yes.
than most in my
Yes.
role.
Yeah, Wendy, you nailed it there. And I think that's the key. I think in certain situations, having the ability to be vulnerable in and of itself is a privilege. And I think this is where part of some of the pushback has go, because there becomes an expectation. We'll just be vulnerable. It's like, well, for some people, that's not safe.
Right.
For a marginalized group or, folks that are oppressed, putting yourself out there could have some pretty serious consequences. So I think it's one thing to be vulnerable, but we need to create conditions where it truly is safe, where for people to be appropriately vulnerable relative to that situation. And I agree. What we often see when you see the clickbait on LinkedIn, it's often people in a place of privilege. It's kind of like people saying, "Oh, we need to speak up. This is terrible what's happening."
Right.
And some people stay silent.
Right.
Well, no, you need to use your voice. Well, what if it's life or death?
Yeah.
I'm gonna stay silent right now because I need to protect. I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes those of us, like you said, Erica, as a CEO or in a position of privilege, it's a lot easier to do.
Right.
I think the expectation needs to be relevant to the individual and the situation.
Yeah. And when you say relevant to the individual, we wouldn't want our listeners to go away here thinking that what they should do is, share, I'm, wondering about the outcome. I'm not sure how to proceed. Sometimes your leaders will respond negatively to that, and that will have repercussions for a staff member because their culture, their work environment, it's not welcomed.
Sure.
Vulnerability is not something that is a part of their culture.
Agreed. So let's maybe think about this, bring this back to the context of leadership. How do we use it in an appropriate way in the leadership context?
Yes. Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing here is that as leaders, it's important that we admit our mistakes. That is a sign of vulnerability, but not just admitting our mistakes, working on a plan to address that. Right? Because you can only show up so many times and say, "Man, I screwed up." And you keep saying that over and over. Sooner or later, your team or your boss is going to start to question your ability. But also share the challenges. Like Eric, you mentioned the example about being scared. That's okay. I think sharing challenges and actually inviting input is what we want to do there, right? But done in an appropriate way for the group. What's your role in that room? As a leader, if your role is to create conditions where people feel safe, then maybe the panic button isn't what we should be pushing in this moment, but it's highlighting some of the concerns and inviting input. And then again, I think the key third piece I see here is be you, be real, but with boundaries.
Yeah.
And again, that links back to that position. Those are the kind of the three that pop to mind for me for leadership.
Well, and when I think about vulnerability, there's so many ways that we can express it in a positive way. Sharing our own learning journey is another way that I see leaders often want to look like they have it all together. They know, they know what they need to know, as opposed to, being vulnerable and say, "I'm working on this. Here's my learning plan. Here's what I'm diving into."
Yes.
Exactly. I to me, if I were to sort of try to summarize what we've said, it feels like what we ought to be thinking about is how to show up as real people, not an armored version of ourselves. But with the caveat that we understand that depending on the safety in your organization, the safety for you, given where you are within that and who you are as a person, we understand that that's going to look different for different people. But being vulnerable is about being ourselves, about being fully human with other people. I am learning. I have made mistakes. I understand that you may make them too.
Yeah.
And that creates that environment of trust. that we're looking for in the workplace where we can work together, forgive each other, and grow together.
Yeah. One thing to add, Eric, as you mentioned, it just popped as you said that around vulnerability. If someone gifts us with, maybe they're coming to us and saying, I've made a mistake, return that vulnerability with some yourself. You know what? I've made this mistake as well.
Me too.
How comforting is that to hear the moment that happens? Because often someone's coming to us with that, return that with that. I think that's an exchange that I think what we actually start talking about is builds trust.
Yes.
And that to me is the power that vulnerability can play.
A final word to you, Wendy?
Final word, be present, be grounded, be real. Think about how, as a leader, you're contributing to the well-being of your culture, and create a container where people can do the same. They can be real, they can be grounded, they can show up.
And with that, that's the conclusion of our episode. We'll see you next time on the Achieve Workplace Culture podcast.
Looking for free resources, training, and consulting in the areas of leadership and workplace culture? Be sure to check out achievecenter.com. That's achieve, CENTRE.com.